Okay, welcome everyone to our Citing and Retaining Evidence of Eligibility Electronically webinar. So in today's webinar, we are going to focus on how your organisation can collect, cite and retain evidence electronically, either through web-based platforms or through other electronic means. The coronavirus situation provides organisations with a unique opportunity to focus more on technology upgrades as part of their processes and implementing business process efficiencies for the long term. We are going to break down some of the components of the recently released fact sheet on SVTS, which was released in February with regards to eligibility. We'll talk about a couple of the main changes to the eligibility form, and we'll have a look at every requirement to cite and retain ID across that form. We will discuss how you can move your organisation to a completely electronic evidence of eligibility management process, particularly discussing VIVO and DVS. And hopefully through the end of this webinar, we'll be able to answer some of your frequently asked questions. So in today's session, I am joined by George, who is one of our quality consultants. And George has had a lot of experience implementing the DVS in particular across skills first fund organisations. Hello, George.
Hello from me, and welcome to today's webinar, everyone.
So before we get started, I just want to shout out that disclaimer, as we usually do. We are not the department, and you should consider all the facts and reference the contract and supporting documentation before making any decisions regarding your business process changes. Obviously, you can listen to our material and ask us for advice as well. But at the end of the day, we do encourage you to confirm any questions that you might have with the department via the SVTS inquiries option. So there have been a couple of changes for 2020 that we believe are of significance with respect to the eligibility form. Particularly the overseas passport or IMI card must be cited and retained when citing formal confirmation of permanent residency issued by the DHA. Okay, so it's just a little screenshot of the eligibility form, that additional tick box that's on there. Also, you'll notice there's a not applicable option scattered throughout that form as well. It's actually against 4 separate sections within that form. And the reason that the department added this not applicable option really was because a lot of organisations were getting confused with a lot of these questions. And there were occasions where they didn't have to address a particular question, but people were still ticking it anyway. I think, George, you'll probably agree that the most common mistake people made on the form historically has been to tick or cite a student's driver's license and tick that box that says that their age is relevant to their eligibility, when in fact it's not actually relevant at all.
That's right, Chris.
Okay, so that not applicable tick box or option has been added to the age question, the highest qualification held question, the 2 in a lifetime question, and also in the note section. So there is an additional note section which we do encourage you to utilise. But if you're not going to put anything in that section, then you should, as per the instructions, write not applicable within that section. In terms of proof of age, you must be cited when the upskilling rule can be ignored. So that's when an eligible individual or an individual holds an equivalent or higher qualification than the one they're trying to enrol in. If the individual is going to satisfy that age rule, then they do need to be under 20 as of the 1st of January within that year that they were about to commence that qualification. Okay, there are some exceptions to that rule, which is VCE, VCAL, foundations, foundation skills programs, and also apprenticeships. It can be the same form of ID used to confirm citizenship or residence if the date of birth is displayed correctly. So, for example, your birth certificate or your passport. If the date of birth isn't included, then an additional form of ID must be cited. So that's where we've got those options for driver's license, proof of age, key pass, etc. Vivo, I'm going to hand over to George to discuss the Vivo requirements for the contract.
Sure, thanks, Chris. So the Visa Entitlement Verification Online, or simply known as Vivo, it's a Department of Home Affairs online service which allows various types of organization to conduct a visa condition check. That could be a study right check or a working right check. So training providers, they can use Vivo on two different occasions. The first scenario where Vivo can be used is to verify someone's permanent residency. What I would like to say here that that feature can be used by the organization, or it could be used by the individual as well. So an individual can go onto Vivo, they can verify the permanent residency status and provide the training provider with an extract confirming that they hold a permanent resident visa. And the second scenario where Vivo can be used is for verifying eligibility for the asylum seeker vet program. While that only applies to Learn Locals and TAFEs, because private RTOs, they're not allowed to use Vivo for that purpose. They have to sign and retain a referral source from the Asylum Seeker Resource Center. So permanent resident visa holders, the generated extract from Vivo, it should display the Department of Home Affairs logo on the top of the page. And it should also display the visa subclass held by the individual. So in that case, the training provider will have to retain both this extract, and like Chris mentioned before, when he presented the updated version of the eligibility form, they also have to retain a copy of the individual's overseas passport. For asylum seekers, you have to use the asylum seeker's ID card to conduct a check. That's the only document that you can use to conduct such a check. And the extract from Vivo should display the logo of the Department of Home Affairs, the visa subclass held by the individual. So asylum seekers are eligible for Skills First funding, provided that they hold a bridging visa E, or a safe haven enterprise visa, or a temporary protection visa. And the document will also display whether they hold study rights or not. Finally, don't forget to run a separate check for work rights if your asylum seeker wishes to enroll in an apprenticeship or traineeship. Now, this is something very important. When you conduct checks on Vivo, the extracts, they're always date and time stamped. So when you present this evidence to an auditor, the auditor will be able to tell when you conducted the check. And as you can see on the screen right now, this is a very good example. So we've circled the date and time and date stamp. So that Vivo check was conducted on Monday, April the 6th. So the student must have commenced after that date. Back to you, Chris.
Okay, so, thanks, George. So talking again about the document verification service, so I know we covered off this to a degree in one of our previous webinars where we focused on online PTR and enrollments. But just again, for your benefit, so the DVS or document verification service compares ID information against government records. So very similar concept to the USI, where you collect ID, or a student submits ID, and it gets looked up against those government records. It can be used to check for both citizenship, residency, and concession. Although please note that not many of the providers offer the ability to verify concession evidence. Most of them will only offer the ability to verify citizenship, residency evidence, or evidence of eligibility. It does require you to engage the services of a gateway service provider, and it will cost money. So it should cost somewhere between $1.20 and $1.60 per check. That's based on our experience with the various gateway service providers. And there may also be some additional fees when integrating the process with your website or in an online enrollment form. So there's two ways that you can use that. You can collect the evidence and perform that verification yourself, or if you want that to be a student-driven process, then there may be an additional cost associated with integrating that into a web form. And as I mentioned before, not every provider will allow you to check concession cards. So when using the DVS, your gateway service provider will provide you with the platform that you would use to perform those checks. The IDs don't have to be cited. You only need the information printed out on the document to conduct the check. So similarly to how that concept of the USI check works, you don't have to cite the evidence, you just have to have the document information. It can be done directly by your students, as we mentioned before, provided your gateway service provider allows an integration with the verification check in your website or your online registration form. And finally, an online transaction record must be retained within the platform and presented to an auditor at audit in electronic format. So what that means is you don't have to keep printouts or paper versions. You can leave that record, that transaction record, in the system, or you can extract it and store it electronically if you wish. So on the left-hand side, we've provided you with an example from one particular service provider. You can see there that we've got a little bit of information there. We've blocked out some of the personal details, but you can see that the record is time and date stamped. So again, George made the comment about Vivo checks, about the time and date stamp having to be prior to commencement. So again, same concept here. You want to make sure that these particular reports are being completed prior to commencement. The report status and document that's verified is listed there. So obviously we need to display what type of document we used, and that will line up with your eligibility form as well. And also it provides you with a report status of verified once that's completed successfully. The individual's name will also appear on that report. If the date of birth is being checked as part of that eligibility check, then we can request that the date of birth is verified and displayed on that report as well. And then finally, the verification requester, so that's the user that's logging into the system to conduct that check. Ideally, this would be the RTO delegate that's also signing that eligibility form. So just keep that in mind if you're building a process like this, that ideally you would want the verification to be requested by the RTO delegate. So in terms of where do we go from here, George, would you like to take us through the next steps for people who are thinking about implementing some of these online processes?
Oh, Chris. So the first thing that you have to make sure is you're using the latest version of the evidence of eligibility and student declaration form. So there is a new version for 2020, and you can find that form inside the guidelines about eligibility. Don't forget to run a refresher on your authorized delegates knowledge. So it's always good to run refresher workshops at least twice a year, I would say. Make sure that the not applicable checkboxes are always ticked. make sure that your RTO delegates are fully aware of what types of IDs they must be cited and retained each time. When to cite and retain proof of age. This is something very critical here because the department now has added the not applicable option on the form. So they're trying to test your knowledge on whether on when proof of age has to be retained. And on the other hand, you don't want to waste your time and you don't want to waste any resources on collecting IDs that are not necessary to be collected. Register your organization with Vivo. It's very simple. It's for free. It only takes 15 minutes. This is an extra option for checking permanent residency. And it's actually an essential registration for those organizations that are Learn Locals and TAFEs, because they can use that service to confirm asylum seeker eligibility. And also train your delegates on how to use Vivo. Consider becoming a DVS user. So you will have to start from contacting a gateway service providers and find more about the costs and find more about what they can offer. Now, from my experience, these providers, they don't have a lot of experience in working with education providers. So you have to be very specific with them. You have to make them understand why you would like to use the service and what exactly, what are the contractual requirements and what you have to be cited and what has to be retained in the platform. So don't forget to choose a gateway service provider that supports all types of ID checks that a training provider has to contact. So you have to find a provider that checks for citizenship, residency, concession, and proof of age. The department encourages the use of the DVS as an efficient and secure way to check ID information. And finally, just make sure that before you move on to using that platform, that service, you always have to consider your student cohort's digital literacy capability, and you have to come up with a very well-established online enrollment process. These two things are essentials.
Thank you, George.
No worries, Chris.
That's the end of what's a very quick little video, just focusing on the electronic eligibility collection. And if anyone needs to discuss that further, or you've got any questions about how your organisation can potentially implement such a process, please feel free to get in touch with us. We've got some instructions there on how you can do that. You can schedule in a time to have a free chat with us about your processes. Otherwise, all the best, and hopefully everyone is staying safe during this period. Thank you, and thank you, George.
Thank you, Chris.